Okay, so can you give us a few reasons why the New Testament documents are not historically reliable? Christian fundamentalists, or as Bob would say, I was a teenage fundamentalist. Apologists would say that the Gospels and Acts were Greco-Roman biographies, recollected memories, etc. Can you give us some reasons why the New Testament documents, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, etc., are not historically reliable and, fact?
Well, one major reason is what Brody and several other scholars say, that the stories look like rewrites of Old Testament stories, and then you have to ask, what is more likely, that a man was walking on water, changing water into wine, healing the sick with a word, all this stuff, raising the dead, or that somebody rewrote a bunch of well-known stories where ancient legendary heroes had done this? There's no way it's going to be considered more probable that, oh yeah, he raised Lazarus from the dead after 4 days and he stilled the storm and all that. We weren't there. We don't know what happened. All you can do is to say, what's more probable? Another problem is that the Gospels do not read like eyewitness testimony, and by that I mean, in the ancient world, they knew what we would call table talk. They knew what that was. Like, we have table talk of Martin Luther. People that knew him wrote down. Yeah, I remember when Martin Luther used to say, I wish people had stopped confusing me with Lex Luthor, or whatever, salvation's by grace through faith, and they say, yeah, Luther used to say this and that and the other thing because they were there. We even have table talk of Hitler, I read a book about the impenetrable philosopher the process, Whitehead, the process philosopher, by a friend of his. He used to hang around and have dinner discussions with him. Whitehead used to say this and that, and there's some gems in there. That's not the Gospels. The ancients knew about that, though, because we have a plainly fictitious work from the 2nd century called the Acts of John, which contains a passage or a section called the Preaching of John, where John, now aged and an apostle, is telling his converts, yeah, I remember when Jesus used to do this or say that. When you look at the content, it's obviously fictitious. It's wilder than the Gospels. But the point is, that writer knew what eyewitness testimony would sound like, but the Gospels are not like that. They're short little nuggets, little anecdotes and episodes like we find about the Greek philosophers. And research into higher education in the Hellenistic world shows that students were assigned the task that they'd be studying Socrates or Diogenes or whoever, and the teacher would say, now I want you to write up a little anecdote where the philosopher addresses so-and-so question to see if you have a good grasp of what he would say. Like people say, what would Jesus do? Well, what would Diogenes have said about this, do you think? So students would concoct these things, admittedly fictional. Well, that looks kind of like what the gospel anecdotes are. And so it's easy to imagine that there are other ways we would have gotten this stuff than historical reporting, or as in Islam, fairly shortly after the Prophet, there were scholars who noticed that there were tens of thousands of hadiths, these supposedly oral reports of what the Prophet did and said, which supplemented the Quran. He's addressing things that don't come up in the Quran. Well, these devout Muslims knew there is no way all of this could go back to the Prophet Muhammad, and so they set up criteria to weed out the fake ones and still came up with thousands of hadith. Well, and it was even known at the time that, in fact, there's I can almost remember the wording, there is no circumstance in which a holy man is more likely to lie than in matters of religion. And there's even a hadith where Muhammad is made to say that people will be creating these, but if they promote piety, that's all right. And I think the same thing accounts for the Gospels, especially when you find that Jesus is made to say 3 or 4 different things about fasting. Now, what was he, a multiple personality? Did he keep changing his mind? No, it's obvious that people had their own opinions, and to drive them home, they'd say, well, yeah, this isn't just my opinion. The Son of God said this. And there's just too many other possibilities, and the deck is stacked against the historical accuracy of the Gospels.